So I interviewed Monty Alexander yesterday. You know him; he's just a great pianist, and it was the most.
Yes.
He was so much fun. He's just an up guy, and you could tell by his music what an up guy he was. It was so much fun. We'll have fun today too. So this is our first my luncheon with Andre. Are you having lunch while we talk or no?
Uh, no, I'm not eating right now.
Okay, I was going to have an apple because I have, we're advertising this as my lunch with Andre. So I'm going to have some yogurt
Okay.
and blueberries because an apple would be
All
disgusting.
right.
Crunching.
All right. Well,
Oh,
I'll have some pure liquid lunch. How's water?
water is healthy as long as it's not beer.
Yeah.
So have you had any interesting adventures in the analog world over the past week or so?
The past week, for analog, not a whole lot of interesting things going on. I've been uh, playing around with a couple of cartridges. I've got a new one in for review that I can't really talk about just yet.
Okay.
Um, but it's it's a it sounds pretty good. Outside of that, I have another phono stage in that I think I can talk about this one. It's one of Xandon's newest phono stages. So I've got to deal with the phono stage and its general functionality as a standard phono stage, but then we have to get into the issue of all the different time constants that are switched around for all those different curves, and that's it'll be interesting to explore that.
Yes.
Um,
Is that a euphemism for they have some very strange ideas about what curves are appropriate for what records?
there are some suggested curves for certain records. There are a lot of things to take into account, of course, which are when the record was actually made, and how it was cut, and on
Yes.
what machine it was cut on, and
Yes.
if it's a reissue or not that used the RIAA curve versus one of the original curves. And so it's a little more, I think it's a little more complicated than just uh, picking something that was pre RIAA and playing it. Um, yeah, there are a lot of things to consider. So I'll have to dive into that a little bit in the review. I'll try to keep it concise.
Yes, and of course you have to be nice about it, but which you are more so than I am. But I know that Rudy Van Gelder cut all of the blue notes and all of the prestiges on the same lathe, and they were all set for RIAA in the stereo,
Yes.
and starting in 1957 or 8. So to suggest a different curve for prestige and for blue notes is like I got into that very respectfully with the people, but and I just got into that argument in Munich with someone who insisted to me that Capitol used their own curve well into the stereo era, and he played me a record, a Nat King Cole record, and said, "Okay, here it is with the RIAA curve, and now here it is with the Capitol curve. Which sounds better to you?" I said, "Well, that's a tone control."
Yes. It's a different, that's the second aspect of it. It's kind of a as you like it ordeal. If you like the way it sounds with some of the other time constants and curves, there's nothing wrong with that. Enjoy it if that's the way you like it. But from a factual perspective, it's somewhat difficult to be able to fully verify that something was cut with a specific curve prior to RIAA, unless you have a record that was actually cut prior to RIAA.
Yeah, I interviewed a veteran Columbia record pressing guy, a mastering guy, who worked there all the way through the pre RIAA period, and he was there when they changed over, and he said to me that Columbia switched to the RIAA curve as soon as stereo recordings happened, as did almost everybody else. And I won't even tell you how he described people who think otherwise,
Oh,
except he said they were smoking something, and it wasn't marijuana. It was much stronger. But so you somehow can't convince people. I spoke to George Betties, who was one of the cutters at Decca in the UK, and he said to me, the RIAA curve is what we used as soon as stereo happened. that
Yeah.
FFRR that's their own thing. FFSS is just a trademark they have, and that it was the RIAA curve. But you cannot convince some people of this. And so when you say to them, look on the back of a London record, which is also pressed by Decca in the UK, and it says use the RIAA curve. So what more proof do you want? You know what they say? They say, well, that they just put that on there to not confuse people. They just said use the RIAA curve because they didn't want to discourage people from buying the records because they'd be confused. So no matter what you say to some people, you cannot convince them. You can get to the first-hand source, but you can't convince them. But that's okay.
Right.
I'll tell you the
Yeah.
problem I'm having right now. I'm reviewing a Soundsmith cartridge, a really, really beautiful. It's a Paua Mark II, and so
Okay.
it's based upon, it's a fixed coil based upon a moving iron technology, and I have it on an acoustic signature Montana, which I reviewed
Okay.
last year. Really wonderful turntable, and I have on it the new Kuzma Sapphire arm that I'm going to be reviewing for the Absolute Sound. And I installed the cartridge. I'm getting this horrendous induction kind of hum when you
Oh.
when you turn on the motor, a motorboating sound. And
Uh-huh.
I've tried every possible grounding scheme that I know of. And I spoke to Peter Letterman yesterday, and he said first thing to do is disconnect the power supply that runs the motor and take a paper clip and put it right under the cartridge body, which is complete. It's they have it like shielded on all four sides. It's completely
Uh-huh.
shielded, and see if you get any kind of hum when you touch a paper clip to the bottom. Because if you do, then it's a problem with the arm. Which I said I can't imagine Frank Kuzma sending me an arm that's improperly wired. So I checked
Yeah.
that, and there was no hum whatsoever. So it's not that. Then he said, try putting a cheater plug on the power supply to see whether you get, it's a ground loop issue, which
Right.
I didn't think it could be that because I had my whole electricity redone last year
Uh-huh.
from the roof down. It's a fantastic
Yes.
change, which I'm sure you've seen that video. It's not that. So I don't
Right.
know what's causing this problem. Have you got any ideas?
Yeah, there is. I actually reviewed one of the acoustic signature turntables also. And yeah, the motors are directly underneath the platter. And the platter is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, a POM type material of some sort. They, the motors will generate a magnetic field. And my guess is if you leave the cartridge sitting on the platter and turn the motors off, your hum will go away. And if that's the case, and you turn the motors on and your hum comes back, then the magnetic field generated by the motors is pushing up through the platter and the cartridge, because the type that Peter has uses will pick up that noise, even though it's shielded on all sides. And that's maybe the issue that you're seeing. You'll be able to verify that. So you may have to move that over to a different table that uses an outboard motor, if that's the case, and then that'll take care of the issue. That's one thing I would suggest trying to see, because that'll eliminate the variables of the motor itself on the platter.
Yeah, I have a whole sheet of that metal that resists magnetic. I forget what you call it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know.
But yeah, just verifying, if you leave the cartridge on the table and you shut off the motors and the hum goes away, then it is being induced by the motors and it coming up through the platter. Take it to so I'm sure you probably have another table around that does not have motors mounted on it, that may have an outboard motor. So that would be one that I would mount the cartridge on and run it on that instead.
Yeah, I'll see if that helps. So far, what I've done is I turned the motor off and pulled the plug out on the motor supply, and there's still a much lower residual. It's a motorboating sound, and
Okay.
and almost like an antenna sound.
Yes.
That's with the plug
Yeah.
out.
Yes. When you unplug it, you still get a little bit of noise. That's
Yeah,
coming from a different source,
yeah,
more than likely. So you have to find a location that has a low magnetic field to run this cartridge on, potentially.
yeah.
Um, Peter may have some other ideas with the shielding on the cartridge itself to be able to shield the actual or ground that shield that's on the cartridge, but that may require a fifth wire of some sort, or the RIAA style, how the ground lines were connected to the arm, and you didn't really have a balance connection coming from the cartridge because one of the channels was grounded.
Yeah.
There may be a solution similar to that that's available. I'm assuming that he hopes the head shell of the cartridge is a metal, and that would ground the cartridge to the tone arm, which would then
Yeah.
help to eliminate some of the noise also.
Yeah.
So there's a couple different things to check out and test to try different scenarios to see what the solution might be.
Yeah. So far, I've actually also tried. There's a ground lug right on the power supply of that turntable, and I've touched it to everything, and it's still a problem. So
Okay.
I had a moving coil cartridge on there, and no problem. So there's something else going on here that I'll have to.
It's specific to the moving iron and the shielding. I mean, Peter wouldn't have put that shield on that cartridge if it didn't need it.
Yeah.
And there's probably some more residual information that's getting in. As a test, you could probably try taking a ground wire and just touching the body of the cartridge and seeing if the hum goes away. And that may be a test to tell you a little bit more information. And whatever you find out, Peter will be happy to get that information back, because that'll point him in the area where the issue might be also.
I usually just show him pictures of dogs, and then he gets happy. Yeah, I spent many hours yesterday trying to deal with this problem, and I wasn't able to. I touched everything. I tried every variable. He said put a cheater plug on the power supply for the motor. I tried that. That didn't help at all. And even with it yesterday, with it unplugged, there was this really loud noise coming out of it. And then I pulled the plug out of the back of the power supply, and then it stopped. I mean, there's all kinds of strange gremlins going on. I'll get to the bottom of it, but it's these are problems that a lot of people face that don't have any idea what to do about.
Right.
And I do from all the experience. So that's why streaming is so great.
Yeah, just sit there and push a pad and enjoy yourselves. But that's not analog. So
no, and it's funny because my wife had a friend over who's in the dog world, because she's in the dog world, and her husband's a minor audiophile, and she came down and looked at my system, and she said, I'd like to hear Fleetwood Mac Rumors. So I streamed it on one of the two, Qobuz or Tidal, I don't remember which. And, she'd never heard a system like mine, and she was just absolutely blown away. And I said, all right, now I'm going to play you the double 45 LP cut from the original analog tape, and let's see what that sounds like. So I played that for her, and she said, I'm a Coca-Cola fanatic. I love Coca-Cola. And so the stream was like a bottle of Coke, a good bottle of Coke in a glass bottle. But the record was like when you go to a soda fountain and they have fresh Coke syrup and they put carbonated water in it and mix it for you fresh. That's what that was like. I thought that was a great analogy.
Yeah.
So I stole it.
Yeah. We've done that. Yeah, I've had similar situations where I'll have someone sit down, I'll stream something for them, they love it, and then I'll play the vinyl, and 9 times out of 10, probably 95% of the time, we never go back to listening to anything streamed anymore. It's just LP after LP is what they want to hear.
Yeah, and so, why is do we really know why is that?
I don't know.
I don't either.
Technically, digital is supposed to be better.
Yeah.
My background is digital hardware design, engineering. I've done FPGAs, digital signal processors, the real ones, discrete devices, also inside of FPGAs, microprocessors, interfaces, and everything. So I've done all this. I know what digital does, The issue is vinyl sounds better. It does. It is continuous. There's no reconstruction that has to happen other than going through a couple of RIAA filters. And the signal just sounds pure, more realistic, and true to life. On well-recorded information, of course. You can always get an album that sounds like crap, whether it's on vinyl or digital.
Right, that's right.
But there's something about signal integrity that you get out of vinyl that is very pleasing to the human ear. And it's not like it's euphonic or anything.
I agree.
It sounds real.
Yeah.
And especially those that are sourced from, the machines that are behind me.
Yeah.
Vinyl tends to play back better with that type of music than digital does. I have to be careful when I say digital because you've got MP3, you've got Redbook, you've got higher resolution files and information. And so digital isn't really digital, so to speak, from that perspective.
I don't like that word being used to encompass everything.
Right.
But, I spoke to a manufacturer of one of the best A to D converters, Pro A to D converters, and he told me not to use his name, but you'd know the brand. It's very, very well known. And he said, I've been reading your stuff for years, and I agree with you. He says we've gotten it much better. The A to D conversion now is much, much better, but we're not 100% there yet. It's not perfect yet. And I said,
right.
Yeah. And what it is that's not perfect is something that kind of bothers the brain, even if the ear doesn't hear it, the brain senses it. That's why people can sit and listen to record after record after record. But with digital, I find there's a finite amount of time that I can spend listening to and enjoying it, and then I need to do something else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Last year, I got to go to Abu Dhabi to visit a guy who's got a very big stereo, and he was flying over. His lawyer was flying over actually, and he chartered a like a private jet, and his lawyer was flying over, and he invited Peter McGrath from Wilson. He's got a big pair of Wham speakers. He invited Peter McGrath over with one of the dealers to come and just tweak his speakers to make sure everything was set up right. And
yes.
at the last minute, he said, "Hey, see if Michael Fremer wants to come. I'd like to meet him." This guy doesn't have a turntable, so yeah, I went on this trip, and on a private. It was fantastic. I brought a stick over with me, and we got to see we got to go to the Formula One race that was there last December, and we got to see the private car collection of the founder of the United Arab Emirates, and it was really an enjoyable trip because I had never been to an Arab country before. And
yes.
it was a wonderful experience. It's a very tolerant place. They're building what they call the Abrahamic Center, which is going to have a synagogue, a church, and a mosque on this piece of property. I mean, it was an amazing, eye-opening experience. And I brought a stick with vinyl transfers from my rig, and this guy was all digital. And I plugged it in, and we started playing these files. And even though it was digitized vinyl, after about 20 minutes, he said to me, "I've never heard anything like that. That's amazing. Why is that?" And I like you just said, I said, I don't know exactly. I mean, we have reasons, but even though it was digitized,
yeah.
He said, "Can I keep these files?" I said, "Of course, you can keep the stick." Fine. And then weeks later, he texted me and he said, "My wife and I sit here and we just play those files." It's wow. I said, "So are you going to get a turntable?" And now he's getting a turntable.
Okay.
He's going to get a Nagra, one of those new Nagra turntables.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, that was fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
And I didn't push it on him. I didn't say, "Hey, you got to hear." I never do that.
Right.
It's there's no point to doing that. So that was a great experience. And now I am recapping a Revox A700. I'm about to start doing that.
Okay.
I got the kit. from an Australian supplier that gives you all the capacitors you need. Have you ever recapped a machine?
Yes.
Is it
Yes, I have.
is it not fun?
Um, if, uh, I have years of experience soldering also,
Me too.
and and yeah, it's not always fun to do it, but it can be done. It's just a lot of work, and the A700 is
It's compact, right?
there's some disassembly required. I picked up one of those a couple months ago, and I've got it rehabbed and fully functional now. I've got two sets of heads. I've got a 4-track heads for it, and I've got a full set of half-track heads for
Yeah.
it. And so I went in and changed the um, EQ for it from NAB to IEC for the 15 IPS. And so I can play the 7.5 and a 3 3/4 4 tracks with the NAB EQ, and then the 15 IPS reels that I have, the majority of them I have are IEC, CCIR, EQ. I can play those on the deck
Right.
at 15 IPS with the half-track heads. And yeah, it's all set. I've got a couple more changes to make to it. I have the capacitors. There are a couple of snubber caps that need to be changed out. Motor suppressor caps need to be changed out. And then some main electrolytics that are in the power supply and on the control board definitely need to be changed out. And so I have all those. And when I have more time, it's on one of my project lists to get to it.
Time, that's the issue. So this machine came from a woman who in Massachusetts, whose husband was an amateur recording engineer and worked with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and he was a hoarder. And I found out about it through the Boston Audio Society. You know those people, Boston Audio
Okay.
Society. They're kind of real measurement. That's it. It's measurements tell you everything. And so I heard about this, and I drove up there, and I got an A700 and a B77 Mark II for $700. And
Wow.
yeah, this house was I'm being literal when I say floor to ceiling boxes of tape, floor to ceiling, and and machines, and a workbench with full of vacuum tubes and fuses and parts. It was like, and the house was actually a hovel. I mean, there was almost no furniture in the house. It was the craziest scene. And he passed away, and she had to get rid of all that stuff. So the machine itself is actually, both of the machines are, I had them checked out. The heads are really good. They've been properly maintained. They just have been sitting for a while. And so I guess that's why the caps went bad on them. But my soldering experience, I mean, I built Dyna kits and Heath kits, before you were born. And I built a Heath kit color TV in 1969. So it's all vacuum tubes, point to point wiring, built in color generator and dot generator. And it took me an entire summer to build it. I did it after work all summer. And it had like motorized pots for every control with a remote control, and you push the button and it would do everything. It took a whole summer to build it. And then when you do all of the alignment, they tell you put one hand behind your back and just put one hand back there because you could kill yourself. Touch the flyback yoke and you're dead. So I was very careful, and it worked perfectly when I finished. I aligned it, and that it had a square Toshiba picture tube in 1969, which was not that common at that point in time. This thing looked absolutely fantastic, and it was for my parents, so I gave it to them. We had it operating for like 3 weeks, and then our house got robbed, and it got stolen.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh
So
no.
you know what I
All
learned?
that work.
You know what I learned from that? How to let go. Just let it go.
Yep.
It was a good lesson.
Yeah. Well, that's a hard lesson to learn, especially after all that time and energy put into that.
Yep, but it worked.
Yeah. I think speaking of Heathkit, I have a volt ohm meter I built in the 70s of a Heathkit that I put together. I still have it to this day. It's down in the basement in my office. I don't use it anymore, but I still have it.
Great. I hoard everything I've ever made. Why not? Including food. No. So, I go to the show. I went to the Cap Audio Fest, and there's the guy there from one of the big tape machine restoring guys. He's got boxes and boxes and boxes of tapes, and I'm very skeptical about how many of these tapes can really be authentic, and what generation tape they would be. Like, he was playing Graceland. How would he get anything from Warner Music like that?
Well, um, briefly, because I didn't think we were going to talk about tapes, but
Why not?
there's the master, um, and I'm just going to say the 2-track mixdown is the master as opposed to whatever multi-tracks were before it.
Right.
Those are session tapes mostly. So you got the master. These guys cut from that. They make backups for it, and then at the time when in the 70s, 80s, and 60s, there were cutting houses all around the world. And so they would make basically masters or safety masters specifically to send out to these countries to cut the tapes. And of course, when they hit the places, you can pick Italy or Germany or wherever, I'm certain they made copies of the tapes also.
Yep.
They used those session masters, and eventually those recording labels and those companies that were cutting and making records shut down. Well, they still have a library of those tapes. And some individuals have, had access and have found those. And so they have second, third generation tapes that were set for either cutting records or CDs or cassettes back then. And they either have those or they have copies of them that they've used. And so there is some lineage to the original master, but I don't know, from the perspective of any of these guys that are not necessarily the commercial firms, what the province is. And you'll never know.
Never know.
Right. The only thing you can do is listen to the tape. And if you really like it and it sounds spectacular and you want it, you get it. Otherwise, you go see Chad, at Acoustic Sounds, or you deal with Tape Project or Yarlong Records or Opus 3, or Phone A, or there's a number of them.
Those we know. We know the provenance of those tapes. So
and you buy those tapes, and you have provenance. Beyond that, you're taking a risk, basically.
I was in Bulgaria, and there's a video on my previous endeavors YouTube channel where I went to this guy's house, and he had literally a wall of these brown box tapes that he got from someone in Bulgaria or in Eastern Europe who got them from a mastering house that closed down, and this guy you can get copies of it from this if you know the right person. They're not legal,
right?
But he can get them, and the guy sells legal ones also. But if you say the secret password, you can get these tapes. So he had a Studer and a pair of Wilson XLFs on a 4th floor walk-up apartment. And I said to him, "How'd you get your Wilson XLFs up the steps?" He goes, "Piano movers. Piano movers put them on their backs and carry them up 4 flights under the penalty of death." No, and he played Stevie Wonder Talking Book, and it was clearly that. It was not from an SACD or from some other fake source. It was really good. And there's a video on that channel that you can see all these tapes. It was pretty amazing. So I was more asking that question rhetorically so that you would answer it, and anybody who has questions about that would get the answer to that. But also, contemporary records. Roy Dunan, the engineer, he purposely boosted the top end when he recorded. He did like a primitive Dolby system. He boosted the top end on the actual master tape so that when it was cut to lacquer, the cutting engineer, who was Bernie Grunman for a lot of it, would dip down the top end considerably to flatten the response, and that became the record. So I know people that are buying copies of, they say they're buying copies of contemporary master tapes. So if the person duping these tapes isn't dropping down the top end by a considerable amount, they're getting very, very bright tapes. So
That would make sense. The question would be, are the tones proper, or do the tones correlate with the boosted high frequencies, which means that if they play back the tapes and they make the cue adjustments properly, they'll be able to listen to the music correctly.
yeah,
I'm assuming if the master is that way, there are probably tones on the master that tell the person who's cutting the record how to bring down the top end.
right.
But yeah, unless you can see the session, yeah, the session and the track list, and you don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, there was a reissue of the soundtrack that I supervised, the TRON soundtrack. So the TRON soundtrack was done all analog, obviously, in 1982, and Columbia Records issued it 52 minutes on a single LP, and it was very dynamic music with a 108-piece orchestra that we recorded at the Royal Albert Hall, and synthesizer overdub and all kinds of stuff, and 2 songs from the band Journey, and the record sounded terrible, and because it was totally compressed. I mean, it was awful. So then Wendy Carlos, who scored it, she released it on CD numerous times, and they sounded only okay. They didn't sound great. And then Audio Fidelity, the label that Marshall Blonstein ran, but he stopped it. He said he wanted to do that on record. Could I help get the tapes? So I contacted Wendy, and she hates vinyl. She doesn't like it at all, and she said no. She said,
Oh wow.
I will give you. Well, she's got one of these old Marantz turntables with the pentagram, that linear tracking thing. It's got that squeeze thing in it. You ever see one of those?
Yeah.
It's a mess of a turntable, and the arm is like on an angle, and so she said, I'll give you a copy of the CD master, and you can use that. She didn't want to have it on vinyl at all. She did, just the idea of it actually coming out on vinyl really upset her. So, but then I said, why do you care what format it's coming out on? It's going to reach a new generation of vinyl fans, and I think they'll enjoy your music. Plus, there are fans that love that music anyway and would want a good copy of it. She said,
Yeah.
okay, if you use my CD. I said, okay. She forgot that she had given me a 15 IPS copy of the master tape back in 1982 that I took very good care of. I had 2 reels of it, one for each side. And the Journey songs that were in the film were not on her tape, but Wally Hyder had given me a copy of those songs. So I had both. So the first thing I did was have them baked and a 9624 transfer made, so I had good digital. And then I flew to LA to Kevin Gray's, and we put the tape up, and it played perfectly. And then Kevin had to cut the tapes up to match her commercial CD, which had the Journey songs on it, so that they would match, and she would never know.
Oh my.
So we did that. We cut the tapes, we cut the lacquers, and it came out. It's so good, but I still have the tapes here, and I can't play them because I don't have a 15 IPS half track machine yet. I have 2 of them here, but they're not ready to go. But the record came out absolutely great. I'm so happy that got done. And then he put the tapes back the way they were, and so that's just one of those great stories.
Oh man, that's great. You're gonna enjoy that when you finally get to spin that tape.
Yeah.
Should be fun.
That'll be fun. Yeah, and I have all of my radio commercials. I have like 2 decades worth of radio commercials that I made, all recorded at 15 IPS half track. And I have cassettes of some of that stuff, but I want to hear the real thing again,
Right.
put together a compilation and put it on YouTube or something and make it available to people for fun.
Okay.
Because they're fun stuff.
That should be fun for sure.
Yeah.
So the TRON tapes, were they done with there's with the 15 IP half track, are they NAB EQ'd or CCIR? Do you,
I have to look and see. I don't remember, but whatever they were, Kevin got it right.
Kevin? Yeah, I'm sure he did. But
But
yeah.
when that was done, the original way we planned on doing this was, well, first the budget that I got was not what it should have been. The original idea was she was going to score it off a synthesizer, which at that point in 1981, it was not polyphonic synthesizers. It was still almost one note at a time, or very few notes at a time. But there was enough time for her to score the whole movie on synthesizer and then add orchestral accents with a small group of musicians we were going to hire and put in a hall and record strings and then sync it all up. But the film kept changing. So it was all put on 3/4 inch U-matic tape with a sync track.
Uh-huh.
And that was invented for this movie. There was, at that point, you could not sync up a reel-to-reel tape deck with a tape machine, with a U-matic videotape. That had just been invented. So we were going to,
Oh, the time code
yeah,
information?
just started 81. It was just getting started for. So the movie was the reels of film were finished in Los Angeles, transferred to U-matic, shipped to her with time code. She would lay a time code on one track of her machine, the rotating machine, which at that point was, I think it was a 4-track machine. It was one of those 4-track, I think it was a 3M. I don't remember the brand.
Okay.
And then she would record 3 tracks, and then we would do some bouncing that had to be done. Then what would and I'd fly to New York every couple of weeks, and we would listen to the progress of what she was doing. And then they recut the movie. So all that was thrown out. And then we had to start over again. And then by around the end of February, we realized this was never going to happen in time for the movie to come out. So we had to totally turn it around and make it a symphonic score with synthesizer overdubs. We punted. And so we hired an orchestrator. She wrote a score, we orchestrated it, and then we hired a guy named John Mosley, who invented quintaphonic sound for the movie Tommy, 5-channel
Okay.
quintaphonic sound. He had friends at the BBC, so we hired a BBC crew and hired the Royal Albert Hall, and we brought the London Philharmonic, or not the London Symphony, or London, a different orchestra. We hired them. We had 108 pieces, plus an organist in that giant organ in the Royal Albert Hall, the one that Frank Zappa played Louie Louie
Yeah.
on. And we had a 2-day session there, and then we had a day at Walthamstow Town Hall, which is basically it's a small town's meeting hall that has amazing acoustics that were used by all the major record labels for small ensemble recording, which I only knew about from reading Harry Pearson and the Absolute Sound. So that's how it ended up. We ended up using that, and the score came out incredibly well. And then we used Royce Hall in Los Angeles to do all the choral work.
Okay.
And this is all analog, so everything had to be synced up. Not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
But she had the skills and the talent to do all of this. I put it all together. And
Wow.
that's how the score happened. And then it was an adventure,
Wow. That's a lot of that's a lot of work put behind the scenes to put that together for sure.
Yeah. And then
That's amazing.
of course, when I got onto the project, they gave me a budget for the sound effects, and the budget came from a Disney movie called Herbie Goes Bananas. Remember that movie with the Volkswagen?
Yeah.
It was like the budget was like $10,000 or $15,000 for the whole movie. It was like crazy.
Wow.
And I said to the producer, I said, this can't work. We're going to be up against ET. ET is going to be our big competition next year, for movies. I need a bigger budget. Well, no, that's the budget you got. Make it work. So there was another guy in Los Angeles who was just starting to play with SMPTE time code. And he said, if you get me the movie time coded on U-matic, I can do synthesizer sound effects and drop it all in. But that was ridiculous, because if you've worked with that kind of equipment, you hit stop on the tape machine, it doesn't stop right away. So it was impossible to sync it up for a for like specific sound effects. We could do ambiances, we could do, you know, certain kind of things, but we ended up having to cut and paste all the sound effects in the old school, transfer it to analog tape, cut it up. So it ended up costing like 4 times as much as it would have had they given me a bigger budget to do it the right way to begin with. So just a lesson in life. Don't skimp and cut corners, you know. So how big is your tape collection at this point in time?
I think the last count was 150 reels.
Of 15 IPS kinds of tapes?
Uh, 15 and 30.
Oh,
I have another maybe 70 4-track tapes
yeah.
that are sitting
I've
down
got
in my office.
I've got about 200 of, you know, these kinds of things. 7.5 IPS quarter tracks.
Yeah, I've got about 60 of those, maybe
Yeah.
no 70, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah, and they sound really good.
Yes.
And they seem to be very robust. I've not had any that have dropped out. I mean, because they were well played, I guess. The people that bought these things took good care of them. And I found a Revox G36 at a swap meet for $40. That was a good swap meet.
Oh my goodness, you're
Yeah,
finding great deals there. I have a G36 and it cost me a lot more, and it cost me twice as much to refurb it completely.
you
But
know,
it hums now. It plays wonderfully.
yeah. This was good when I got it, and it came with the service manual and all the paperwork. Whoever had this thing was really careful with it, and I sent it into a guy to check it and, you know, check the heads. The heads were good. Everything was good. He just replaced a couple of minor things, you know, mechanical things, and it sounds fantastic. And I
Wow.
love playing that thing, so that's fun too. But mostly I play records. You know, I have got 16,000 records, so that kind of keeps me
Yeah.
busy.
Yeah. Yeah. LPs are where most of the action goes here also.
You know, there
But
was an
tape,
event. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say LPs where most of the action goes, but tapes are fun. Those are kind of like dessert, so to speak. That's how I describe them to people. So, you know, you have an appetizer with some digital music, some streaming and high res, and then you get to the main course, which is vinyl.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you want a dessert before you go home. We'll cue up a tape and let you hear that. So
Sounds
that's
good.
usually the progression.
Sounds like a good plan. A good plan. So I hope to get these machines both fixed up, the B77 afterwards, and
Okay.
and then I'll have every format. There was an event at one of the shows in Los Angeles about 10 years ago, and they brought in, it was Ying Tan, you know, Ying Tan from Groove Note.
Yeah, it's from Groove Note.
Yeah, he brought in a master tape, and they played it back on a Studer or a Revox, you know, a good machine, and they compared it to the double 45 RPM version. I think Bernie Grunman cut it all analog on a Brinkman balance, I think, and so that you could hear the difference. And honestly, while there was a difference, it wasn't profound. There was a difference, especially on the bottom end. The bottom end had more power, but it wasn't like, oh my God, kind of not as big a difference as between a CD version of it and a record version of it. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, there are a lot of variables that are associated with that, whether we're doing, you know, music from a CD or high res, what DAC you're using, the output stage they're using, all of their filters that they're doing, all that stuff comes into play. We know that.
Yeah.
And then with analog, we've got variables also, you know, different cartridges, they all sound different. They're not exact. You got cables, you got tone arms, tables, phono stages, all that stuff changes the sound to some degree. Well, surprise, tape is the same way. These decks, I've got 8 of them. And the only 2 that sound even close to similar are the 2 that are behind me because they're exact same tables, decks, and they have both been fully calibrated professionally as far as getting the heads lapped and aligned.
Yeah.
And so these are the only 2 that are close. The other decks, they all have a signature and characteristic sound. So we're always going to have that overlaid on any format that we do a comparison with. So when you play back the vinyl, you're at the mercy of all the playback equipment and the source itself, which is the vinyl that was cut. And when you play back a tape, you've got the same issues. You're at the mercy of the playback equipment there and the tape itself, because if the tape wasn't done properly or recorded well, you're going to have the same issues where if you had an LP that was cut bad, you know. So there are variables associated with that that we
That's
have to deal with.
that's why when I hear from some people in the industry, well, I use a master tape as my reference for what things should be sounding like when I, you know, produce what I make. And I say, but the master tape can sound different on different tape decks and different electronics, and there's so many variables. That's kind of like a false comparison. You really can't. I mean, it means something on some level, but it's not dispositive of what you're producing just because you're using a tape as your reference. I don't buy that.
Well, I can agree with that. If you don't have the experience of dealing with tapes and knowing that these variables exist, you can get yourself into trouble.
Yeah.
Along the same lines of if you never listened to a nice series of cartridges, phono stages, and turntables, you can get yourself in trouble with that. Now, if you listen to a lot of different tape decks and you understand what their benefits, what their enhancements are versus their downsides, and you can understand what the equipment does, and then get a handle on if the tape is a very good tape recorded properly and know what all those variables is in the mix, then yes, analog tape can be a source for you to compare to another format. But that other format, you have the same variables that occur. You need to make sure that whatever you're using, cartridge, tone arm, turntable, phono stage, what their performance levels are. So if you want to get them together where you've got them kind of, you're moving up on each one, you have to know what they're doing, each
Yeah.
of the devices and what's happening. Now, I do have tapes that are incredible sounding, and I do have a favorite tape deck that I'll play them back on. I can play them back on other ones. And then, yeah, I do use that as part of, not exclusively, but part of what I use to compare the sound that I get from some of the analog equipment that I own, and then some of the equipment that comes in to see how it performs and how it sounds. But sources or sources, and whether it's analog, whether it's one of the formats that are under the umbrella of digital, or if it's tape or vinyl, any of those formats can perform really well and sound great, but you're at the mercy of the equipment you use, and you're also at the mercy of the source material that you're trying to play back. And so it's more nuanced than just, hey, I've got a tape deck and it'll play 15 IPS tapes and my vinyl doesn't sound like this, or my vinyl sounds better than this tape deck. Well, there may be reasons for that.
Sure.
And it becomes very nuanced and more complicated to kind of get to the bottom of what's going on. But if you've got all your sources, whatever you have from a source perspective, if you've got them all performing well, you're doing well. And if you're listening to music and enjoying it, you're doing great.
That's the point.
And that is exactly.
And you know what else? One of the fun things about this whole hobby is everybody hears differently, obviously. People have different preferences all over. You go to a hi-fi show and you walk room to room. Everybody has different ideas about what sounds like music. And when you get a turntable and a cartridge and a phono preamp, you can tune it to your satisfaction, to what you like. I mean, I try to make it neutral. I'm a big proponent of neutrality, and I don't like honey warmth and glow and all these other things. But you can't tell people what to like. And
No, you can't.
yeah,
I agree. And it's interesting because if we weren't doing what we do, um, writing about equipment, evaluating it from a somewhat objective perspective, or at least a perspective of trying to explain what the device or component does, convey that to the individual, and hopefully what we tell them will correlate with what they have, regardless of what their flavor of the day is.
yep,
If we weren't doing this, then there is, well, I don't think I would, you probably wouldn't either, but for someone who's not reviewing, um, they can put together a system to sound the way they want it to sound and enjoy it. And there's no big deal for it.
right,
But for what we do, neutrality to me is important, because what it allows me to do is get to the essence of what the equipment sounds like that's in for evaluation.
that's right.
So I can see what's going on. I don't want overly warm or overly bright cables. I don't want an overly warm or overly bright transducers, whether that's, the speakers, the cartridge, or the heads on the tape deck.
That's right.
I want something that's close to, nothing's going to be perfect, but I want something that gets in the area of neutral, so that when the component is injected into the system, I can evaluate that component and how it sounds, what it's doing, and then convey that information back to the reader. So I think our jobs are a little bit different, as far as when we're writing, and I can't have a system that I use for evaluation that's colored. That's me personally.
No, I mean,
I feel that way.
and don't you
There are
hear
some,
you hear it in a minute. You go around a show, you know exactly when something is extremely colored, when it's like this got this warm thing going to it. You know it immediately. You
yeah,
hear it, and then you can't not hear it anymore.
yeah,
The best systems are the ones where you walk in and there are certain manufacturers, you walk in the room and you know it's going to be good. You know that it's going to be honest, and you know that recordings are not live music, because you can walk out into the street and if there's a guy there playing a trumpet on the street with looking for money, it's going to sound more like a trumpet than anything you're going to hear in the room. I'm sorry to say, it will.
yeah. Well,
So,
and there's nothing wrong with that. I still have this. At some point, I still want a pair of quad 63s.
yeah,
And I want to run a pair of quad 63s, and I want to take my little, the little Niagara 4S or the Stella Vox, and put that in that setup, and then put a smaller turntable in there, and just have a system that's quad based system. And a quad's beautiful mid range, sounds good, especially the 63 is very coherent sounding, but I'm not going to have any bottom end. I'm not going to have any serious dynamics.
right.
And my top end isn't going to be as crystalline clear.
Yep.
But that's not a review system. That's a fun system.
Yeah.
Different usage. And I can enjoy it. And I have friends with completely different systems and associates all around Cincinnati. I can take you on a trip if you ever come here to visit all these guys. They all sound wonderful. They all sound different.
Yeah.
Every owner of each of those systems enjoys their music. They listen to it constantly. And I tell them time after time after time, that's what's important. What is important is if you're sitting down, you're listening, and you're enjoying music. If that is happening, you've hit the mark. If you're frustrated all day long and you're playing around with, equipment here, and you don't like this and don't like that, and you're flipping equipment all day long, something's wrong.
Exactly.
Yep. You need to find your core. You need to ground yourself. You need to figure out what it is you're looking for, and then go look for that, and not, always thinking the grass is greener, the next piece of property.
Yep.
But
one of the first assignments I had when I started writing for the Absolute Sound in 1986 was to interview Roy Halley, who, was Paul Simon's engineer and did all the Simon and Garfunkel records. And, he was just a great engineer. So I got to meet him, which was thrilling. And he lived in Connecticut, and he took me upstairs into his room, and he had two systems in the room. So one system was basically Harry Pearson's system. He had the big IRS speakers. He had Jardie electronics. He had, I forgot what turntable. He may have had a Goldman. He had duplicated Harry's system. And then he said, this is what I listen to for enjoyment. When I want to know what's on the recordings I make, I use this system. And it was a pair of the Wilson Watts, the original little Watts, and some Mark Levinson solid state electronics. And he said, this is tells me what I've recorded. This is what I listen to for pleasure. And that's really two different things. And so we have to listen to something that's more honest and
Yes,
straightforward. Otherwise, we don't know what we're doing.
right. I agree. But we also need to enjoy it. And
Yes.
hopefully wherever we swing on that side of neutral, whether it's on the warmer side or the leaner side, hopefully we are close to neutral and not way out in left field somewhere, because that kind of skews everything and you can't really tell what a component is doing at that point. You've got so much else that's covering up things, but you know.
I like to add the coloration if I'm going to add it either at the cartridge or at the phono preamp. But even then, I'm tending towards, I've got a CH Precision P1X1. It's a, trans impedance amplifier.
Yeah.
Phono. It's, to me, it's very neutral sounding and very dynamic, and I don't want to mess with it. If I want a little more coloration or a little more something or other, I have the Ypsilon VPS 100, which is really nice. It's not a noisy piece. It's very quiet. That's what I can get on both sides of that sort of fence. And then I'm covered. So then when I review another phono preamp, I can see how it compares to those two. And I think I'm pretty well there. So I just finished reviewing the MC Diamond, the Ortofon MC Diamond. I just handed in the review yesterday. And that was a very impressive piece. It's a modification of the MC Anna. They had to get rid of the name because, little did they know when they decided to pay tribute to her that Putin was going to invade Ukraine, and she was close to Putin. So that's not why they came out with the new version of it. They made significant changes to certain parts of it, but you have to be careful who you endorse at all times. So yeah, I'm enjoying myself so far, being back where I started and being on the same side of the fence. So now I can go visit my friend Jacob without it being a secret.
I don't think it needed to be a secret, did it? I think most people know that you and Jacob are pretty close.
Yeah, but still, you got to be careful what you talk about. Which we were. We were pretty well disciplined for being undisciplined. Anyway, we've been at this for an hour, which is great. I think it went really well for our first lunch date. So
all right.
You enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much.
It was fun.
And I hope we can do it again every couple of months.
All right.
Okay, have fun.
All right. Take care, Michael.
Nice being on your team, Andre.
Yeah, it's good to have you here too. I think everybody's happy that you're on board.
Great. Okay. See you.
Bye.